Welcome everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on making your business a hard target against consumer and visitor claims during COVID-19. My name is Lori Berman. I'm Vice President of Membership and Development for the Small Business Association of Michigan. Today, as part of our normal series we do for members during this crisis, also free to all small businesses across the state of Michigan. A special thanks to our presenters here today from Warner Norcross Judd. Before we get going, I have a couple rules for you. Folks, if you would place your questions in the Q&A, there's a Q&A answer queue at the bottom of your screen. Please post questions in there. I ask that you post questions only related to today's content. I also warn you that today's content is not legal advice. We are helping to educate you and direct you to where you can find the right answers, and also so you can understand when it's time to seek a professional services for some of these issues that we're dealing with today. If you have questions we don't get to today or questions on other topics, please send them to sbam@sbam.org. That's sbam@sbam.org. And our presenters also are going to be giving us emails at the end of today so that you can see those as well. So let me give a proper introduction then to our speakers today. We have three speakers from the Grand Rapids office of Warner Norcross and Judd. And I might tell you that Warner Norcross and Judd has been a great partner of the Small Business Association of Michigan. They have helped us with compliance benefits that we offer to small businesses. And they're also a partner, a sponsor with our Leadership Council. So we appreciate the Warner Norcross and Judd sponsorship and partnership. Thank you. Let me first introduce Janet Ramsey. Janet's a partner in the Grand Rapids office. She specializes in complex commercial litigation. And I love this. This is her definition of her specialty. She said it's simple. Any case that feels like a combination of drinking from a fire hose while simultaneously trying to untangle a bundle of Christmas lights large enough to fill a warehouse, that's what this is like. Throughout her career, Janet has specialized in a number of high-profile and high-value litigation across a wide range of substantive areas. Her skill set she brings to these cases can be difficult to define, but she brings a type of value that is immeasurable and invaluable. Also with us is Thomas Amon, who's Senior Counsel in the Grand Rapids office. Tom is a seasoned litigator who specializes in complex commercial disputes with an emphasis on class action defense, toxic torts, and real property litigation. Tom has represented large and small companies in a variety of cases. We're happy to have Tom here today. His litigation in cases as both the state and federal level in both the trial and appellate courts. So he brings that experience to us today. Thank you, Tom. And then last but not least is Lance. Lance Zoerhoff is Senior Counsel in the Grand Rapids office. He is a litigator and his expertise is in supply chain and real estate disputes. Lance learns each client's business and appetite for risk and tailors his litigation strategy to fit each client and matter. Happy to have you here today. And with that, I will let you take it away. We will be monitoring the question and answers. Again, post your questions in there. Without further ado, Janet, we'll give it to you and ask you to share your screen again for the slides.
I will, thank you. So I just hit share screen. Can we get a thumbs up if everybody can see what we got? Good, thank you, Ms. Lori. Okay, so we have got, thank you to everyone, and thank you to Lori and the Small Business Association of Michigan for hosting this. We wanted to jump right in. We've got our bios in here, but frankly, Lori did such a great job. There's frankly no need to talk about those anymore. So we'll jump right into the agenda. We're going to talk about where Michigan stands today. As everyone knows, we got a new order this week, so we'll kind of give you a very brief update on where those are. You may have seen some talk about potential immunity for some of the types of claims we're going to talk about today. We're going to give you an update on that. We're going to talk about the epidemiology and exposure and the science and basically why it matters for the type of risk management we're talking about today. Then we're going to give you an update on litigation, and then the real bulk of the program is going to be section 5, which is where we talk about risk mitigation techniques that we would recommend folks consider. So big picture, we're looking at potential claims from consumers or visitors who come to your business and then come back later and say, hey, I got sick. I got sick while I was at your business. or I got hurt, or, you know, something happened. And so that's the kind of claims we're talking about today. We are not going to be talking about the employee or workplace issues that might exist. We do have webinars that have already been recorded that you can actually go to our website, wnj.com, and get and watch if you need a more in-depth discussion of some of the employee related issues. That's not what we're going to dive into today. We also know some of these issues are highly politicized, and we understand that. We're not advocating or criticizing any particular policies. We're just talking about kind of the state of play as it exists today. And some of the things we'll recommend, there are requirements. As everyone knows, in this environment, we've got requirements, but then there are some things you can do, recommendations we have to make yourself a harder target for potential claims, not requirements, but maybe things to consider. So if a plaintiff's attorney is thinking about suing your business, perhaps it makes them pause, right? Makes them stop before they do that. So there is a difference, and we'll try to be very clear about when we're talking about requirements versus recommendations, but you'll see some of that throughout our discussion today as well. And then, as Lori said, we'll answer the questions the best we can. And please feel free to follow up with any of us. We do have, for those who might not know, we do have certain ethical limitations on what we're allowed to discuss in these type of presentations. So we do the best we can within the rules that govern our profession. But so if we don't get to it today, we'll do our best and follow up with you. Or if you don't hear from us, you can follow up with us. So with all of that, I'm going to hand it over to Tom, who is going to give us an overview of the current state of play in Michigan.
All right, thanks, Janet. Okay, so we will start back on May 7th. May 7th is when Governor Whitmer published the Michigan Safe Start Plan. That establishes the framework for reopening the state. And what's on your screen right now is basically the 6 phases of the pandemic that are identified in that Safe Start Plan. They range from uncontrolled growth, where you can see the pandemic spreading exponentially. That's at the beginning when everyone was concerned that we would see our hospitals overwhelmed by the pandemic. And then you get all the way to post-pandemic, where basically it's over and we're done with it and it's business as usual again. So the question of where we are at right now, well, what's on your screen right now is not a perfect guide, but in the latest executive order that was issued this week, Governor Whitmer noted that the state was at 4 on this slide. So depending on how you want to look at this, we're probably at between 4 and 5. But let's talk about that latest order that was issued on June 1st. So I'm going to get to some of these highlights in a minute here, but first, the important things to note under this order is, first, on June 4, which is today, retailers can resume operations. On June 8, restaurants and bars can reopen fully. Swimming pools and day camps will be permitted. But it's important to remember for all of these reopenings and under this executive order that they are subject to the safety guidance and restrictions to mitigate the risk of COVID infection. So the big one here is Executive Order 2020-97. So many of you are probably aware of this because it has been in the news, but for restaurants and bars, for example, it requires that they limit capacity to 50% of their normal seating. It requires 6 feet of separation between tables and a number of other items spelled out in the order. So other restrictions that remain in effect, certain businesses remain closed regardless of region. These are generally considered highest risk, like indoor theaters, public pools, gyms, anything, hair salons. Activities where you're either have a big crowd gathering together or people in close contact for an extended period of time. Furthermore, any work being capable of being performed remotely has to be performed remotely. There's limitations on, we talked about 2020-97, but there's also limitations on social gatherings and events. Those are capped at 10 people, and outdoor social gatherings and events are capped at up to 100 people. One of the common themes you'll hear today as the science on COVID emerges, activities outdoors tend to be much lower risk, significantly lower risk than indoor activities. One final thing to note after talking about these executive orders is that cities, villages, and townships can impose more restrictive requirements. So you'll want to check with your local municipality to see if they're doing anything different. My guess is many of them are simply following the state's detailed guidelines, but they might have something more, so it's worth checking with them. Okay, next slide. This slide is about the golden ticket. So what am I talking about? Well, some of you may have seen in the news, and this was almost a month ago now, that Mitch McConnell announced that he wouldn't support another coronavirus relief bill unless it protected owners from lawsuits related to COVID-19 exposure. So what's he talking about? Well, the basic idea is Congress can pass a bill, and if it's signed into law, could broadly insulate businesses from claims, tort claims, relating to COVID-19 exposure. Basically, you were negligent, and because of that, I was exposed to COVID-19 and injured by it in some way. This kind of legislation could get passed on the state level as well. There's actually 4 states, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Utah, and Wyoming, that have passed this type of legislation. But Michigan has not. The most we have in Michigan so far are some protections for healthcare workers. But let's say down the road, you open up the Detroit News or the New York Times and you see a statute is passed, a new law is passed protecting businesses from COVID-19 claims. You should not assume that it protects you because there are many proposals out there. You know, even on the federal level, after suggesting that that any bill would have broad business immunity, Mitch McConnell later stated that any proposal would just be limited to healthcare worker protection. So it's important to understand the scope of any statute like that is passed. And of course, it's important to remember nothing like this has been passed yet. It's very much up in the air as to whether that would happen or not. So you should not assume that would happen. So in the meantime, what you need to do is many of the, of course, complying with the executive order and the guidance that's out there, but also other tips that we're sharing today. And with that, I will kick things back to Janet to discuss the science of COVID.
Okay. And you're probably sitting here thinking, just tell me what to do, right? And so just tell me what to do when I reopen my business. And the reason we're going through this, particularly the science piece, is I think it helps people both understand some of the recommendations that we're giving, but also empowers them to think creatively about solutions within their own work environment, right, in their own business. And so why we talk about science is causation. So for someone to sue you in your business and say, I got sick at your business when I went and visited there, they have to prove that they caught COVID there, that they have it, that they caught it, and they caught it there. And the harder you can make that causation argument, the harder target you are for potential plaintiffs' lawyers. And when you're looking at causation in these types of exposure cases, you're really looking at not just was there the potential to be exposed to COVID, but also how long, right? There's definitely a difference between 2 people running past each other in a big wide open plane versus sitting in an enclosed space for 4 hours with very little ventilation and you know, lots of talking or choir practice and some of the other examples we've seen in the news. So with that said, this is actually a figure from a CDC epidemiological study, and it's actually a picture of a restaurant. So the circles, the large circles, A through F, are the customer tables, and then the individual circles, starting with A1, are the customers themselves, where they were seated. And so A1 is the infected individual, the individual who had COVID. And everybody with a red circle is someone who got sick. They've been able, through contact tracing and the work that they've done, able to trace back that the individuals with the red circles actually contracted COVID at this restaurant from A1, from the individual at A1. And what's interesting about this picture is the airflow starts on the right-hand side. So you'll see by table C, there's an air conditioner, and it goes through, you can see the airflow goes through across tables C, A, and B. So not only do you have about a 50% infection rate at the table where the individual was sitting, but you see infections at both adjacent tables that are within the airflow, with the table that is downstream, right, having a higher infection rate. And so this is why when you're trying to understand, and I've even seen this in judicial opinions, people are trying to understand, well, why is this okay and that's not okay? this is the type of science that regulators are dealing with. And so you'll hear us talk today a few different times about, if you can get outside, if you have the opportunity to have tables on the sidewalk, or get some part of your operations outside, this is why, because increased airflow, having people in that space very much help reduce the potential risk. So, and what's interesting here for E and F, tables E and F were outside the airflow, and as you can see, did not get infections. So if you're looking at your space, this is why you might see recommendation about throwing the windows open, or that kind of thing. It's a very interesting study, and I'm showing this next one just to let you know about offices and why we're continuing to be encouraged to work from home to the extent we can. This is one floor of a call center, and all the blue seats are people who got infected with COVID. So there was one person on this floor in this call center, and after they did all the contact tracing and did all the work, this were the number of people that were infected. So again, you have enclosed space, not very good ventilation, lots of people. Now here they're shoulder to shoulder. Obviously they weren't social distancing yet, but you can see how it can kind of start to spread. So we want to make ourselves hard targets for plaintiffs' lawyers. We want them to pause and think before they file a complaint against your business. And so you want to make causation a hard story for them to tell. And to do that, you can obviously need to follow all the applicable orders and guidelines. Tom has identified those. You want to do everything you can to reduce potential for exposure on site. And this is where, and we understand particularly as small business owners, what you might be able to do, what's reasonable for you is very different than like a Disney amusement park, right? Like so you want to look at how you can do it with reasonableness within the resources that you have. And if you do identify a potential for exposure, you definitely want to reduce the duration. So this is why, curbside takeaway versus sit in the restaurant. Now as we're reopening and we have lower capacity, people are actually allowed to stay in, this is what you're thinking about, is time and exposure. So I hope that helped. We're now going to jump into the what we are seeing. And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because it's not what you're here for today, but I wanted folks to understand we are seeing a lot of cases filed that cite COVID. So this research that you're looking at here on this page is simply complaints that are filed in court that mention the word COVID. And you can see we have, not surprisingly, a large uptick. And then when you dive into the ones that were filed before May 2nd, they're primarily contracts and insurance cases. So you're looking at the refund cases. You didn't refund my gym membership when COVID closed it down. You didn't refund my college tuition. You didn't know that. And the point of this slide is we're not seeing yet the types of claims that involve, I got sick at your business. There have been employees who have filed those kinds of claims. There's a Walmart employee in Illinois and some other situations going on, like with the meat packing plants. But we haven't yet seen the I got sick at your business type of claims. So that's good news. That is good news. And one of the reasons is causation is just very difficult to prove, as you can see by the science we just talked through. But honestly, most businesses have been locked down. So there hasn't really, where you're going to get an increased opportunity for these kinds of claims as we move through these phased reopenings. And so it's not that there's no risk of these claims being made, but thankfully to date, we haven't seen as many of them. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about the kinds of claims you might see in your business, right? As a small business owner related to your products or your services. So these are one specific examples. So you could have, depending on what you do, a claim made against you about the actual product itself. So Purell's been sued because they make claims that sort of imply an ability to prevent COVID or somehow keep you from getting COVID when in fact that's not true. We're also seeing price gouging complaints. So this is businesses who upped the prices quite dramatically on certain products that people needed, in particular during the pandemic. These have quieted down. I think most people have gotten in line, but it is something to keep in mind. There are pricing statutes and they change quickly. General negligence and tort claims, and then unfair competition is one I want to spend a quick second on. So obviously times are tight, and when times are tight, we've been through this before. We've been through it, after 9/11, we've been through it through the financial crisis in 08 and 09. And we know when times are tight, people get more competitive. They just get more aggressive in their marketing claims and the claims about their products and the claims about their competitors. And here we have an interesting example with Grubhub. So Grubhub was sued because they were saying that certain businesses were closed during the pandemic, and based on the complaint, so on the face of the complaint, the businesses weren't closed, they just weren't partners with Grubhub. They weren't part of Grubhub's system. So this is a kind of an extreme example, but you do need to make sure times are tight, everybody's trying to do the best they can with what they have, that in the push to be maybe more aggressive in sales or marketing, the normal laws still apply. So you got to be careful. You got to make sure your sales staff aren't overstating certain benefits of the product or things like that. So just something to keep in mind, because we've seen this cycle happen during times of financial difficulty. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tom, who's going to talk to you about some of the other types of claims we've been seeing in these spaces.
Yeah, thanks, Janet. So one of the areas I practice in is class action defense. So usually whenever there's a high profile event going on, for example, a global pandemic, there will be obviously a lot of news stories, and we've all seen them. We've all been caught inside looking at these news stories, and those can usually the earliest lawsuits to start flowing from that event are brought by plaintiffs' class action firms. They tend to be pretty zeroed in on the issues, and one of the effects of that is we see a lot of copycat claims follow, either individual claims brought on a smaller scale by individual lawyers and plaintiffs, or other class actions against smaller companies. But there's a few different categories we've seen here. First, we have seen class actions filed against companies for failure to protect customers from COVID. So the early examples were cruise lines. Cruise lines were impacted immediately, and Carnival Cruise has been sued by a class in a class action, and the plaintiff wants to bring claims on behalf of all the passengers who were on the ship, on a ship where a COVID outbreak occurred. Another area is privacy violations, and this might not immediately come to mind, but COVID has forced many people online. Invasion of privacy is a common law tort. So recently Zoom, for example, was sued, the very platform we're using, alleging that its lax privacy practices unlawfully invaded the privacy of its users. So we've seen that flowing from COVID. Refunds, these are more contract-based claims, but many events were canceled because of COVID. Class actions were filed against Ticketmaster, for example, because Ticketmaster changed its refund policy, saying, well, I'll give you basically store credit. And the plaintiff's class action lawyer said, no, not good enough. You cancel the events, you have to refund the tickets. 24-Hour Fitness, the same thing. All their gyms shut down nationwide, but people were still paying for gym memberships. Plaintiff's class action lawyer sued, saying, you have to give us a refund of the membership fees. We can't use the gym, even though we paid for it. And then the service was not provided by the method described. This is something that we've actually seen in Michigan over the past few weeks and months. Class action lawsuits have been filed against all the major universities. And one of the theories in those cases is that because COVID caused universities to deliver classes online instead of in person, students should be entitled to recover damages. So we're seeing claims like that out there. These cases are still in their very early stages, but they're just examples of what's being filed by plaintiffs out there. And we can consider this the first wave of lawsuits in the wake of COVID. I think it's reasonable to say that once things open up and get back into swing, if there are COVID outbreaks in various places, we're likely to see more litigation over this. So with that, I'll kick it back to Janet to start discussing kind of what you as a business can do to help protect yourself.
Right, and so we're going to talk about risk mitigation next, and Lance is going to kick us off here in a second. I want to remind folks that we're going to talk about some things that are requirements, but then there are other things we're going to recommend that aren't requirements. And if you have any question at all about was something we referenced a requirement or just a recommendation, please either use the Q&A function or contact us afterwards. So Lance, I'll go ahead and let you kick us off with the available guidance we have regarding some of these risk mitigation strategies.
Thanks, Janet. I just want to start off by saying, because I get this question all the time, that there is no magic list out there that if you do X, Y, Z, or these 15 or 20 things, that you can insulate your business from a consumer claim. Each of your businesses and operations are unique, and they present unique risks. So you need a plan specific to your particular business that addresses your particular risks. But there are some good guidances out there, and we've listed a lot of those here that you can look to when putting together your reopening plans. The top of the list, and they're at the top of the list for a reason, are the CDC and OSHA guidelines. These are the most widely adopted COVID standards by government and industry leaders. Michigan has adopted the CDC's social distancing and mitigation measures through the governor's orders. All employers in Michigan are required to put together a preparedness plan, which is required by OSHA standards. In other words, make sure when you're putting together your reopening plans, make sure you comply with these guidelines. I think Tom touched on the governor's orders and also the local orders, but you're going to want to make sure whatever reopening plan you put together complies with the governor's orders. They do have different requirements depending on what industry you're in, with some heightened requirements for manufacturing and construction. They can also vary according to region. I think Tom also covered that there are local orders and regional orders that may apply to you. These vary in scope and who they apply to, but you want to check these out when putting together your plans for reopening. You want to make sure that you comply with all those orders. Trade associations have some great materials, and we use these a lot for our clients. They'll get you thinking about specific risks in your particular industry and have some unique approaches about how to address those risks. We've listed a few here from in the hotel and restaurant space. Michigan Licensed Beverage Association also has some good materials on its website.
Oh, Lance, and I apologize. There's one thing I wanted to add in this section because I did just seen it recently. Kent County is doing this. I'm not sure if other counties are, so it's worth checking into, but they actually have a grant available for small businesses who need some assistance in making sure they have the proper PPE, whatever it might be as part of their reopening. So the Kent County has that link on their website for that PPE program, grant program, if you need it, if you need resources. The Right Place has some links as well, but those are more where you can find PPE. What I thought was nice about the Kent County one is they're making funds available for small businesses. So you can check into that if you need it. Sorry, Lance, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Not a problem. And the last but not least, your Small Business Association of Michigan has some great resources on its website. It's listed under the COVID link on the website, and it has some great materials. So as you're putting together your plans, we think there's some good common sense rules that you can use in putting together your plans. First rule is make sure your plan is consistent with current guidance and the orders, and keep it updated. I'd emphasize to keep it updated. These guidances, both the CDC and OSHA, change frequently as more is found out about the virus and as more businesses open up. And so there's frequent changes. Both communicate through their website, so you want to monitor the website for any changes to their guidances, and you're going to want to adjust your plans accordingly. A good way to keep on top of this is just to designate somebody internally as the point person who is responsible for monitoring such changes. The second rule is clearly communicate what you are doing, when you are doing it, and why, and then do it. I think there's 2 points here. Do what you say you're going to do. It's worse to have a plan and not execute it than not to have a plan at all. So have a plan, train your employees on how to do it, and do it. And then secondly, I would emphasize that clearly documenting what you did, when you did it, and why will create a nice internal record of what you did and how you adjusted or pivoted to any changing guidance and stayed in compliance with those particular requirements. That will be invaluable if you're ever faced with one of these consumer claims. Third rule is use multiple communication pathways, social media, website, in-store signage to clearly communicate your plan to your customers. And again, keep this communication updated. That includes clearly communicating what you're doing and what precautions you're taking to address risk of COVID, and use multiple communication channels to get this message out to your customers. The more customers that know what you're doing and the more they know what to expect when they come on site, the less chance of them complaining or acting up if they're asked to comply with your new policies and procedures. In addition to putting together good, well thought out reopening plans, you can also use waivers and disclaimers if it makes sense to limit your risk for your business. Waivers they're actually an agreement between you and your customer before they enter. And waivers are really in the context, we're seeing most businesses with regular customers, such as health clubs, golf clubs, using liability waivers with the customers. But they're an agreement where your customer signs this document, says we recognize and acknowledge that you're taking some measures and precautions related to COVID. But even though you're doing these things, we recognize that there's still a risk if we come and visit your store or your business, and they are agreeing to assume that risk. A waiver also includes a release of claims against your business and facility. It does not include a release of all claims. It does protect you from claims that you were negligent in not addressing a risk, but it doesn't go to the point of protecting you if the claim is you were grossly negligent or recklessly ignored a known risk on site. I guess a way to kind of illustrate that is if you have a spill on site and you discover that spill and you're in the process of going to get supplies to clean that spill up, and a customer slips and falls because of that spill, that probably falls into the category of negligence. At best, it may not even be that. But if you discover the spill in the morning, you decide to take your morning coffee break and clean it up later, you then set up a table next to the spill and have your lunch, and then 8 hours later it's still not cleaned up and somebody slips and falls, that probably falls into the category of gross negligence. In that context, that would not be covered, or you wouldn't be protected if your customer signed a liability waiver. That falls outside of the risks that are covered by those. If you currently use waivers in your business, you likely need to update them to cover any kind of COVID risk. Waivers only cover the risks that are specifically mentioned in them, so you need to call out specific COVID risk in order for the claim, order for the waiver to cover those types of risks and release you of liability related to those risks. Disclaimers. So if a waiver isn't practical for your operations, you may consider a disclaimer, which is a great low-cost way to limit your risk. A disclaimer is a warning that notifies the customer that even with the precautions you're taking, there's still a risk and that they're willing to assume that risk. It is not signed by the customer before entry. It is simply something that's posted typically on a website or at the storefront, letting them know that there's still a risk out there, and if they want to visit your facility or business, they know that that risk exists and they're going to assume it.
Well, and Lance, I've always thought a good example of that is when I take my kid to Michigan Adventure or Cedar Point, right? There's this giant sign at the entrance about all these things that are being disclaimed and the risk that we're taking walking in there. And so that's kind of a real life example of the type of disclaimer you're talking about. While when I go to the YMCA and I sign the waiver when I become a member, that's a waiver.
Correct.
Okay.
And we're gonna walk through an example here that we really like, which was put together. It's a reopening communication put together by Disney Springs, which included as part of its reopening communication to its customers a disclaimer regarding voluntarily assumption of risk if they choose to visit. Although Disney is a very large corporation, Disney Springs is a collection of small retail shops and restaurants located next to its park in Orlando. So we think this is an applicable example and a helpful example for smaller operations too.
Right. And we're not saying this is what you have to do. This is an
Right.
example of kind of a best practice of someone who we thought had kind of the right tone, the right message, was kind of hitting the right issues. And they weren't just putting a disclaimer out there. They were putting it out there in the context of a much larger, very positive reopening plan.
Correct. So Disney Springs did a great job of getting this out in advance of reopening and getting it on their website. And I'm sure they probably had signage at their facility too, or at each of the retail shops. But we like this reopening communication for several reasons. First, it does a great job of clearly communicating to Disney Springs customers what they are doing to address COVID risks. And it clearly conveys to the customers what they can expect if they choose to visit. Customer expectation is in setting that customer expectation early and through as many communication channels as you can will help avoid any kind of problems if they're then asked to comply with those procedures like temperature checks or face masks being required or limited parking. After reading this disclosure or this communication, the customer clearly knows what to expect if they come to visit. The communication conveys, it also, second, it conveys Disney's plan in a very nice, positive tone, as Janet conveyed. It says that Disney Springs is taking these steps for the safety of its visitors and of its workers. And third, it includes a nice, clear disclaimer that says, in no uncertain terms, that an inherent risk of exposure to COVID exists in any public place where people are present. If you want to visit, you voluntarily assume all these risks related to COVID. If similar disclaimers are also posted at the storefronts at Disney Springs, they are laying a nice groundwork for a good assumption of risk defense if they're ever faced with a customer claim. So a well thought out reopening plan, along with potentially using disclaimers and waivers, if that's practical for your operations, will put you in the best position to avoid being a subject of a customer claim. So in that, I will kick it back to.
Well, I think, yeah, because so now for the group, we've got some specific case study, because I think we've all seen either during the lockdown, at essential businesses or through reopenings, we've seen a few things that frankly have gone awry at businesses. And we want to make sure that we talk through a couple of these case studies and just give you some lessons learned from them that might help you as you keep working through these issues at your business. And so the first one up is Tom is going to talk to us about some mayhem that happened on Mother's Day.
Okay, and this one we'll call the Scofflaw example. This is kind of the highest risk situation, but basically the scenario here, and this was in the news, is during a stay-at-home order, during a lockdown when all restaurants were shut down, a business owner in Colorado tweeted out, I'm fighting for my rights and so on and so forth. I'm going to ignore the order in place. I don't care about what public health authorities say. We're opening anyways. So what happened after that are a couple things. First, they opened up the restaurant with no safety measures in place whatsoever on Mother's Day. No one was wearing masks. People were packed in close proximity to each other in a confined space for an extended period of time. And one of the studies that Janet discussed shows this is kind of one of the ideal types of scenarios: indoors, close proximity, extended period of time for spreading COVID. Before we get to whether people were actually infected at this event, the restaurant did face immediate consequences. I mean, they were breaking the law, so their business license was suspended and they were shut down. We saw more examples of this in Michigan. For example, the Owasso barber who took his case up to the Court of Appeals, and they said, no, you're shut down because you're violating the order. But that's not the end of the story here. Other than the immediate consequence of associated with breaking the law, you can be assured that if there is a COVID outbreak and that's eventually traced back to this event, there's a pretty decent chance that the owner of the restaurant will be sued. So can't the owners argue that the customers shouldn't have come to the restaurant if they were sick? Well, this doesn't really help you that much, because we know that COVID can be spread by asymptomatic people. Second, it's the restaurant, not the customers, who controls the premises. under the law, the restaurant is the one that is responsible for the safety of the premises. The customers simply are not in a position to control the premises, how many people are in it, and things like that. And finally, your customers are not the only potential plaintiffs. Here, something to think about, just kind of food for thought is, well, what if someone caught COVID at this event on Mother's Day, and then they went and visited one of their elderly parents, who's in a nursing home or something like that. They could cause not just an outbreak at the nursing home, but their particularly vulnerable population, parents, to come down with COVID. The test generally in this area of law is foreseeability. And looking back on this with 2020 hindsight, was it foreseeable that packing your restaurant full of people during a pandemic may result in this happening? Well, that's going to be up to a jury to decide. What about if the restaurant opened without taking any safety precautions, but all of its customers had to sign waivers at the door? Well, Lance already discussed this a bit. Waivers help, but there's no such thing as a bulletproof waiver. And importantly, at least in Michigan, a waiver is not going to protect you against claims of gross negligence. And Lance got into what that standard was, but basically when you're flouting the law, when you're not taking any safety measures whatsoever, you're packing your restaurant against government orders. This is an example of something where a plaintiff's lawyer is probably going to have quite a bit of a grist to argue at least gross negligence. This is kind of our first example, and I'll kick it back for another example.
So our next one up is Lance. And so here was the ice cream shop where their reopening day did not go as planned.
Yeah, and before I get into this example, I just want to make sure everybody can hear me clearly. Yep.
It's a little muffled, so we'll just do your best. I know we've been,
okay.
For those on the line, we know we're having some muffling issues with Lance, and so we're going to do our best to get that figured out. But I think, yeah, go ahead.
I apologize. I'll do my best to speak up. So this is the ice cream shop in Massachusetts that recently reopened with limited staff to scoop ice cream. As half the staff had to be reassigned to run the ice cream out to the parking lot. The owner asked its customers to call ahead an hour ahead of time of their arrival so that they could get their ice cream. The customers did not get that message. The ice cream store was bombarded with customers, and there were really long waits, which resulted in the customers lashing out at the employees of the ice cream shop. It was so bad, backlash was so bad that the owner's best employee quit, and he had to shut down his shop after only being open for 2.5 hours. Ultimately, the owner decided to close the shop back down until he could get a better handle on his new way of operating. I think there's 2 lessons from the ice cream shop in Boston, Mass. Clearly get your message out and set your customers' expectations well ahead of your reopening. Let them know what to expect and what to do in order to get prompt service that will help solve any problems or prevent any problems of them being surprised when they show up at your facility and they're not getting the same service that they expect. And don't rush the reopening if you're not ready. If you need extra time to get a plan in place, maybe even do a dry run. You can call it a soft opening, where you try out your procedures and see how they work, make any adjustments you need before you open to the general public. But make sure you're ready before you reopen.
Thank you. And so our last one, we realize this is not a small business target, but these kinds of issues, unfortunately, have been in the news. And I know they're very top of mind for all businesses, especially for the safety of their employees, which is when you have a non-compliant customer, and how do you handle someone who maybe refuses to wear a mask or refuses to maintain social distancing, and they, what is your obligations, right? And so first of all, you're not the police. So like any situation, and these are not normal times. So think Black Friday, not kind of new normal. And so just like you would on a Black Friday or anything else, if a situation was escalating, the procedures you use to handle it in that context are the same here. And call the police, right, if you have to. Your employees are not the police. But you do need to make reasonable and good faith and consistent efforts for customer compliance. And I'll be very frank with everybody on the call. that means different things to different businesses. Some people are more direct. Some businesses are more direct in their enforcement strategies. I think some of us maybe have seen a Costco employee who very kindly escorted somebody off the business. And some businesses have made the choice to have the signage and maybe have handle compliance in a different way rather than employee to customer engagement. So that is up to you to figure out what's right for you and your customers and your employees. What you're looking to be able to say is that I had a reasonable, good faith, consistent efforts for customer compliance. That it wasn't just, we weren't just faking it, right? We weren't just going through the motions. But if push comes to shove literally and a customer is getting out of control, just call the officers. Now, we know that this is not the top priority for them and they may not come, right? They may not come. And in fact, there's probably a good chance they won't. But the next step is not to escalate it with your employee, right? So that's the point of this slide. And I know face masks are very much a hot topic. So we want to give you just a little bit more guidance. This is an example, and we will be sending these slides out to you guys afterwards. So you will have this, you don't have to write all this down, you'll have it with you. This is an example of how Disney Springs handled its mask communications. And I thought they hit the tone right for the kind of customer service organization they are. And this is also in the latest order from this week. It had some more detailed language regarding the face mask issues. And so we've replicated that information here and kind of summarized it for you. They can remove it to eat or drink when seated at a restaurant or bar. You are permitted to deny entry, and those types of things. So when in doubt, go back to the governing laws, right? These executive orders when it comes to these. And so we have the benefit now of having sections 6 and 8 already start their reopening into this next phase. So I wanted to very quickly go through. I've pulled some examples of what different small businesses here in Michigan have done to communicate with their customers about these different issues. And so here we have, despite his more militant stance, it's actually a shoe store. And what I liked, Clam and Don, you can kind of see their name on the right-hand side. They've got a lot of signage. You can see it not just in one place. They're very clear about their customer capacity. They have the hand sanitizer and masks outside. Like this is, a very clear, to Lance's point earlier, very clear communication about expectations. And here we have the Omelet shop, for those of you who may recognize it already. As you can see here, they're using their outdoor seating. They're wiping down, the server's wiping down between customers. She's got her mask on, so does the server behind her. So all good practices in play. This is actually from Right Brain Brewery. They have hand sanitizer out. From what I've heard from how the reopening went in region 6 and 8, this was one thing a lot of businesses did, was make sure they had a lot of hand sanitizer and other tools out and available for their customers. Here, this is Cherry Republic up in Traverse City. They have, it might be difficult to see, but they have a plexiglass screen between the worker and the customers. And you may have seen that at like a Meijer and Target stuff, but even some of these smaller businesses are using the plexiglass screens. And then we have the Omelet shop again. And here I just liked this one because you can see how clear their communications are with their customers right there when they pull the door open. So they did a really nice job on that. And this one is actually, I give these people a lot of credit just for honesty. And I've seen this here in Kent County as well. The Franklin just said, we're glad we're reopening. We're not ready yet. And this is to Lance's, lesson learned from the ice cream store. We're getting our plan together. And I know a lot of people in the restaurant industry in particular, and 50% capacity is great, but it might not be doable for a number of different reasons for different organizations. And so, if you're not ready or you can't reopen for whatever reason, or you can't reopen the way your customers may expect, just be really honest with them about what and why you can and can't do. And so we now wanted to talk to you, we have a few minutes left here, about some creative solutions, because the whole goal, especially small businesses, one of the things I love about small businesses is I think you guys really have a license to be creative in a way that some of these big behemoth corporations don't. And so we wanted to highlight for you, we're not saying you should do this, but we just wanted to let you know about some creative examples that people were doing to become compliant with these issues. And the first one up, I think, is yours, right, Lance? Our inner tube folks here.
Yes. So I believe it was a bar that opened up, and they set up these large inner tubes that people could get in the middle of on wheels to enforce in a creative and fun way, if you like that kind of stuff, their social distancing practices and keeping folks away from each other. This is something that, you know, some people really might want to go to, and it might actually increase business. Other people may stay home. But.
Yeah. Your imagination, you're only limited by your imagination
Right.
and the executive orders in the CDC. Yeah. Okay, let me get to the next one here, because our next one relates to the outdoor seating theme that we've had.
Yeah, and I'll just talk about this really briefly. And this is a point that I touched on earlier. But one thing, especially for restaurants or really any business that has outdoor space that it might be able to utilize, especially in the summer months here, consider how you can utilize that outdoor space, or maybe focus on your outdoor space more. Because we know that COVID's less likely to spread outdoors. So it's really a risk reduction mitigation kind of strategy. You also may want to consider contacting your landlord or municipality to see what you can do about expanding outdoor seating or expanding outdoor uses at your site. You know, municipalities may be flexible. They may have more public space available that maybe you can temporarily use or something like that. So it's just another option to keep in mind, and to keep in the, if it works for your business, just think about maybe increasing your outdoor seating.
Right. And I'm charged with I think common sense can often be creative. So I want to stick to Tom's slide for a second, because you can see what Right Brain Brewery here did. I have a 12-year-old son, so I tend to view the world through the lens of a mom of a 12-year-old son, which means take all temptation out of the way, right? If he doesn't see the Xbox, he won't be tempted to play with the Xbox when he's doing so. Here you can see what Right Brain Brewery did. They made their tables both outdoors and indoors. They set them up in such a way that no one had to think about social distancing. It's already done for them. And you know, Starbucks did the same thing. They literally just took the seats away, so they couldn't become non-compliant because there simply wasn't anything there to do. And so that's why I think Lance and Tom, you know, dry runs, running through it, like you have to look at your facility in a new way, not just your operations but your facility. And the easier you can make it to reduce temptations, the better. And so we love the creativity, and there's lots of creative stories out there, but common sense at the end of the day answers a lot of these questions. And so we wanted to give for you, Lance is going to give you some just additional, these aren't requirements. These are not in an executive order as written, as we have them here. These are ideas that we've seen executed to help people comply with the spirit intent of what we're all trying to do here, which is keep each other safe. So.
Yeah, that's right, Janet. This is just a list of other examples that we thought were good practices or practices that other businesses have taken. And it's really meant to be thought-provoking. Looking at this list, see if these could be applied at your particular facility or your particular business. Again, there is no magic list of things you need to do, but here's a list of things that can get you thinking about things that may be a good practice at your particular facility. I just want to touch on a few of these. I think clean touchpad surfaces between users is a low-hanging fruit. I think some businesses do it here in Michigan. Others I've noticed do not. I think online offerings, I've had a lot of clients that have now gone towards gone away from storefront brick and mortar retail shops and moved a lot of their stuff online. They've actually had a lot of success with that and increased business. I think that's a good route to go. Reduce customer shared items. So that would be things like menus, product brochures, etc. The less you can have something that's shareable, or if you can make that shareable item disposable, the better off you'll be and the better you'll limit your risk. And I also think the idea of eliminating patron wait areas and have patrons wait in their vehicles before either being seated or providing service is another great idea. So.
Great, thank you, Lance. And so just to kind of bring things to a close here, and I want to contextualize this. So the goal is to make yourself a hard target so that if a plaintiff's attorney is thinking about suing your business, they stop and think twice, right? And so, but there's going to be instances where maybe you get a letter or you do get an actual complaint. What you want to have in your toolkit, what you want to have already done is an accurate record of what you did and why, right? So that's why we've talked repeatedly throughout this session about having a plan, sticking to the plan, writing the plan down, and keeping it updated so that, you know, hopefully this won't happen, but if it does, you have a written plan that was tied to the applicable orders and guidance that accurately reflected what you were doing and why. And you can show that you reasonably and consistently executed that plan. That doesn't mean perfection, okay? That doesn't mean perfection. That is reasonable, consistently execute the plan, and that you kept it updated both in the writing, right? But in the actual execution and training your employees and making sure everyone's up on, I have to keep up to speed on what our daily practices are with our own operations. And so I understand the frustration, but it does make life easier down the road, I promise, if you have it. And so with that ultimate goal of if a claim is made in the future, you have right at your fingertips an accurate, reliable record of what you did and why. And I know I've written these letters, I'm sure Tom and Lance have, where we get a letter where someone's made a claim against one of our customers, and we do the investigation, or we do the, go back to the customer and go, okay, or the client and say, okay, is there anything here? And because they had and kept the records, and because they hadn't tracked what they'd done and why, you're able to call what I write as a wow letter, but write a wow letter back that makes plaintiffs' lawyers stop. Right? Stop and think, stop and not file a lawsuit. So that's the kind of record you want to make. And let's be honest, plaintiffs' lawyers are looking, right? They're looking for the next outbreak. They're looking for claims. And if they walk in and your people are compliant and they're wearing their masks and, you've got good signage and all of that, they're going to keep walking on by. It's like, I grew up in a town where no one locked their doors. And so, and when I moved to communities where people locked their doors, I asked, well, what's the point? You can break into the door, right? Like anybody can kick down a door if they really want to. And the point was to make yourself a harder target. Because if your door was locked, if they had to go to the work of, getting the crowbar out or whatever, they were going to more likely to move on to the next door, right? In the apartment complex. You want them to move on to the next door. You want to be the door that's locked, that's hard to open, so they move on to whoever the next potential target is. So that is, Lori, that's the that's the presentation. It doesn't look like we have any questions. Oh, go ahead, Lori.
Today, no, very quiet group. Just the amount of content that business owners need to know or consider right now is enormous. I have to say I don't have a question now, but I have received a few from members asking if they have to publish that plan or submit that plan to anyone. We're telling them no, but as some of the licensing are pushed down to different divisions, that particular division may ask for more of a plan or something different. But I love your strategy on having a plan. Very important. Yep. Very good.
Well, thank you to everyone. I highly encourage you to reach out to Lori or us if you have follow-up questions. We really appreciated folks taking the time and listening today. We hope it helped.
To say that we did record this. We will post this on our site later today. And I know Janet's going to send me the slides so we can put them on the site as well with the recording and the slides. So thank you so much, Lance, Thomas, Janet. We really, really appreciate your time. We appreciate the partnership with Warner, Norcross, and Judd.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
You're very
everyone.
welcome.
Have a great day. Bye now.